Seahawks, quarterback situation, 2025 and beyond. They're probably going to bring Geno Smith back. I recognize that that's the most likely scenario based on the lack of other great options out there. But let me throw 3 choices at you, and I'll leave them for the audience and everybody else as well, and you guys can make your decision on how you would like to handle it. If you ran the Seahawks, which of these 3 things would you do for next year quarterback? Option 1, re-sign Geno Smith at, what's the number, 40, 45 a year?
My guess would be less than that, more so like 35-ish.
Really?
Yeah,
what's he at now?
25.
All right. Well, that would be better. 35.
That's my guess.
Okay. Well, let's call it 35 to 40 then. That'll be somewhere in between my guess and your guess. Your guess is probably better than mine. But let's say somewhere in that range. Geno Smith at that number. That's option 1. Option 2, sign one of Daniel Jones, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields. Maybe there's another name that I'm missing that you want to put on that list. A guy that you could sign for, a couple $1,000,000 who would come in next year and you would try to rehab them the way the Vikings were able to bring around Sam Darnold this year.
Okay.
That you're hoping for the Sam Darnold effect. The argument here is either you end up with Sam Darnold 2.0 at, a super cheap cost, and you're able to spend the additional $30-something million on other things to help your offensive line, Ernest Jones, all the other things that you want to do, or it fails, and you end up in the top 5 or 10 the following year when the quarterback draft class is a lot better than it is right now. That's option 2.
Okay.
Option 3. Go crazy and trade a ton of picks to try to get J.J. McCarthy. Colin Cowherd said that that's exactly what the Seahawks should do.
They got a first and a couple of fifths. They don't have any draft picks. Seattle's drafting 18th. They need a quarterback because they got a Super Bowl roster. I totally get Seattle saying, we're going to have to start paying some of these stars we have. Let's roll it with J.J. McCarthy. If I ran Seattle, John Snyder, I'd make the deal tomorrow. I'd make the deal tomorrow. Reset the clock. J.J. McCarthy, don't have to pay him for 4 years. With this Seattle talented roster, where in about a year, you're going to have to start paying people big boy money. Vikings don't have any picks. So this stuff is starting to add up. I got nothing against J.J. McCarthy, but you can't let Sam Darnold walk out of the room.
All right, Brady, those are your 3 choices. Are you interested in what it would take to get J.J. McCarthy? It would probably take a lot. Here's Adam Schefter.
In a limited quarterback draft class where there are far more teams that need quarterbacks than quarterbacks who actually can step in right away, I definitely think teams will be checking in with the Vikings to see if they have any interest in trading J.J. McCarthy. Now, they may say we don't, and that's the end of it. But do I think teams will explore that option? Of course. Absolutely. 100%. Because J.J. McCarthy would have been a top, if not the top quarterback prospect in this draft. And yes, he's coming off the ACL, so what, doesn't really matter. And if the Vikings decided that they wanted to trade him, which I don't know if they will, I believe they would get back everything they put into him and then some. It would be a one and then some.
All right, so a first-round pick and obviously more than that in order to get him. Brady, those are your 3 choices. What do you want to do?
Well, let's flesh out the whole the J.J. McCarthy possibility a little bit more, because when you were out last week, we asked Daniel Jeremiah that, and he said a top 5 pick this year. So I think even with the J.J. McCarthy...
That's what he's worth.
Yeah, that's what he would get this year. And that sort of jives a little bit with what Schefter said, being, they spent, the 10th pick on him last year. And if it's going to cost more than that, which I think is fascinating, because now you're talking about a guy who's coming off a knee injury and has 1 fewer season left on the rookie contract. You're talking about giving up a whole lot. So I think in the first place, there would be a question of whether the Seahawks even have the resources.
Let's say they do. Okay. Let's say they do. Let's say that is an exaggeration, that you're right. Coming off of that kind of an injury with 1 fewer year of control, it's going to be somewhere like the 18th pick and maybe next year's number 1 or something like that.
I would probably go with either 1 or 3. And I would just not want to put my eggs in the basket of hoping that you can sign a reclamation project and that guy works out. Because for every Sam Darnold that works out, there's 10, 15 guys that don't, And so I think it's too risky. Now, if you were to do that and pair it with, a veteran bridge guy or, a draft pick, then maybe that's a little more palatable, but you're still just asking a whole lot. You're trying to catch lightning in a bottle, and I just don't think that's a viable plan.
I would agree. It's probably, if that was the only plan, I would agree with you. But the point of that is, if it doesn't work, you're bad. Like if you bring in Daniel Jones or Zach Wilson and they stink, you're going to be bad, right? And then you're going to end up with a top 5 pick. You get your quarterback and you move on with your life.
But do you want to suffer through a 17-game season of being bad?
I don't want to, but I really don't want another 9 or 10 win season. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done with mediocrity. Seahawks have been a mediocre team for the better part of a decade. They've won 3 playoff games in a decade. I'm done with mediocrity. I'm done. I'm done with being in the middle. And unfortunately, in the NFL, when you're in the middle, you stay in the middle.
Yeah.
And I would like them to be good or be bad.
And that is just kind of like a philosophical, I think, difference that they have taken as opposed to some teams. Some teams have been willing to be bad in order to, the idea of taking a step back in order to hopefully take a couple steps forward. And like they haven't picked, I think they've picked in the top 10, twice in the past 10 years. And one of those times was because of the Wilson trade. The other time was because they went, 7-10.
Yeah.
And they had, so there is merit to that. I think they would tell you that they never want to be one of those teams that does that because they don't want to put their fans through one of those horrible, 4-13 type years. But going back to the question at hand, 1 or 3.
But I think the reason I'm not out on 2 is that either you end up with one of those horrible years and you end up with the pick, or it works. Like you're not just committing to a bad year. You're not saying, okay, we're going to be bad this year. You're saying, look, either we're going to be bad, or maybe Justin Fields were able, in his 3rd stop after learning behind Russ and everything he did this year, maybe there's an opportunity for him to be the next Sam Darnold or one of these other guys.
Yeah.
You're kind of giving yourself a shot at either of those options.
Problem is, he was 4-2 when they made the switch to Russell, but couldn't hang on to that job. That just makes you wonder. I mean, he would probably cost a little bit of money too, so I don't know if that would be an entirely cheap option. I don't know. And the other thing is, like, okay, if you're going down the rabbit hole of saying, okay, it either works or you're terrible and you get a high draft pick, how much do we really know about the 2026 draft class of quarterbacks to say that would really be a viable strategy when it's one thing to say that about if you know, like, okay, it's Shador and whoever else, and you know this draft class. How much can you really know about next year's draft class to think that, yeah, you would feel really good about that strategy of having a high draft?
Probably not. You don't know everything, but you know more than nothing. You know it's supposed to be a better draft class than this year, for whatever that's worth. This year's particularly weak after last year was so great. So, yeah, I get it. JJ McCarthy, you want to deal the house for JJ McCarthy?
See that, and that is another he's another unknown because he's a guy who was not carrying that offense at Michigan. And I look, I don't. He obviously was drafted in the top 10, and enough teams saw enough about him. And again, like Adam Schefter said, in this draft class, he might be the 1st or 2nd quarterback taken, as opposed to the 4th or 5th last year. So, but there still is a question of like, how much can this guy carry an offense when he wasn't really asked to do that at Michigan? I just think, going back to the Geno idea, the reason why I think 1 or 3 would be, more so my preferences, and the route I would go is with Geno. I think we've lost sight of what like paying Geno means and what rolling with Geno means. Paying Geno doesn't mean you give him a Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, even one of those like 2nd tier type deals. It doesn't mean a 4-year, $200 million contract. I think, look at the last deal they did for him. It was a 3-year, $75 million deal that, for a while had him, and I think it still is. He's the lowest paid veteran starting quarterback in the NFL, and that was not a long-term deal.
Yeah, but is he going to be okay with that again? Or does he say no? I mean, like he's I think going to view it as I've got some leverage here. I'm the 3rd highest passer this season, et cetera, in terms of yards.
But
there's not much about Geno that tells me his personality is like, yeah, I'm going to settle.
No, but what leverage is he really going to have?
Hold out. Like, you think you're a good team next year, I'm not going to be here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just think the way the new CBA works is it really undercuts a guy's ability to hold out, and just with the fines and everything. And so I don't know. I mean, certainly the way that, just based on what I know, and well,
then why not do nothing and just play out the contract and move on?
I think I think if you don't offer him a contract, then I think that becomes an ugly situation. Yeah. I don't think he
So
would.
that's worse than offering him a contract he doesn't want?
Well, I think he's at some point going to realize that, he doesn't have a whole lot of leverage, and, he's going to have to take a deal, like, even if it's not the deal that he wants.
If I were him, maybe I'd rather just play out the contract and be like, let's play out the last year, and then I'm going to go get paid in free agency the year after that.
But,
At 36.
At 36. And remember, the deal that he signed a couple of years ago, that he technically never hit free agency, but we all know how this works. Agents go to the combine. They can, without their guy reaching free agency, they can get a pretty good idea of what the guy would get if he did go to free agency. And so I think that 3-year, $75 million contract he signed in March of 2023, I think at the time that reflected what his market value would have been.
All right, we're going to keep discussing over the course of the morning.